rooster cried into the frostbitten silence, but Edna May Hollister did not look up from her kneeling place near the orchard. Her fingers worked the frozen earth with quiet defiance, pulling weeds that hadn't yet learned the season was over. Steam still rose faintly from the grave nearby, Eli's, her husband's, though it had been 6 months since they'd lowered him in. 6 months since the storm, the fall, the slow-spreading gossip that he had died with gold fever on his breath and something darker at his back. The townsfolk said she ought to leave, that a widow alone out by Flat River was only delaying her misery. That land didn't want her, and maybe Eli hadn't either. That gold was a curse when it came too late. She didn't answer them. She had the chickens, a stubborn old milk cow, and rows of stubborn potatoes trying their best beneath the hard soil. Her hands, cracked and dry, had no room for company, but plenty for grit. The wind carried the scent of burning pine from her stove, faint and sweet. The trees lining the edge of her field had thinned in the cold, skeletal now. She stood, brushed dirt from her skirts, and let her gaze fall over the fields, tired but still hers. Down the road, a figure on horseback emerged like smoke unraveling. He rode slow, saddle creaking. Edna stiffened, one hand moving to the hoe near the porch. Her shoulders still remembered the shape of fear. The rider stopped at the fence, dismounted with the patient weariness of a man used to silence. His coat was patched but clean, his face half covered in stubble, his eyes the color of storm glass. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of a worn hat. "Name's Wes Calder. Heard you might need help with fence work." "I didn't send for no one," she replied, wary but not cold. "No, ma'am," he said, stepping back slightly. "Figured I'd ask. I do iron work in posts, mostly. Move around." She studied him. The weight he carried wasn't in his saddlebag. It was in the way he stood, like something behind him still pulled at his boots. She saw the scar beneath his right ear, the slight favoring of his left leg. Soldier maybe, or someone who'd been near too many endings. "The gate's sagging," she said at last, "and the south pen lost a post in the last wind. I'll take a look, if you've got a minute." She nodded once, and he walked slow, respectful of the land of her. Not many men did that anymore. Most looked right through her, like she was already buried, just hadn't noticed yet. While he worked, she fed the chickens and hauled water from the pump. Not much was said, but she noticed he used 2 nails when one would have done, and tested every latch 3 times before stepping back. Care like that wasn't for show. She offered him coffee once he was done, wordless, just a tin mug extended on the porch. He took it like it was gold. "Storm coming?" he asked, glancing east. "Maybe," she said, "though not all storms bring rain." He tilted his head. Truth in that. They drank in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. When he left, the fence stood straight and sure again, and Edna found herself standing at the gate longer than necessary, watching his figure dissolve into dusk. That night, she went to the far field to check on the irrigation ditch. Her lantern swung low, casting long shadows over the stubbled ground. The wind had stirred something loose beneath the elder tree, and when her boot hit it, the sound was not root or stone. It was metal. She crouched, brushed dirt away, and pulled out a strange, heavy rock. Not pure, but threaded with veins of something golden, faint but real. Her breath caught. She'd heard stories about how Flat River once gleamed like a vein of fire, long before she and Eli arrived. But they dismissed it, said they came for land, for quiet, not for gold. She turned the rock in her hand. It gleamed dully in the lantern light, like a secret just beginning to speak. The next morning, the town of Dry Bend blinked as she walked through. Edna rarely came into town unless necessary. Now, with a burlap sack slung over one shoulder and a wrapped basket of eggs under the other, she moved quietly among the market stalls. Eyes followed, some familiar, others newly sharp. "Edna May," called Miriam Finch, Silas's wife, from behind a barrel of canned peaches. "You've been a stranger." Edna gave a polite nod. "Been busy." Miriam leaned in, her smile brittle. "Heard you had a visitor yesterday. Big man. Quiet. Fixed a post." "That's so." Her voice dropped, curious. "Funny what folks are saying. that you've got gold on your land now. Edna set the egg basket down carefully. Folks say lots of things. Miriam clicked her tongue, disappointment feathered in her tone. Well, best be careful, dear. Money brings more than just attention. Sometimes it brings trouble. Or truth. Edna left without buying sugar. By noon, Silas Finch himself came riding up her path, the dust of Dry Bend still clinging to his boots. He dismounted like he owned the world and half its ends. "Edna," he said, smiling too wide. "Heard something mighty interesting. Thought I'd come by personal." "I didn't send for you, Silas." "No, but I thought maybe we'd talk. About Eli. About your future. I always told him you were too fine to waste on poor land." She kept her face still. "Funny, he never mentioned that." Silas chuckled, but his eyes didn't. "Now don't go talking it wrong. Just saying, if there's gold out here, and I do mean if, maybe there's ways we could help each other. I've got lawyers. You've got land. Makes sense too." "I'm not selling," she said flatly. "And I'm not talking about Eli with you." He stepped closer, voice low. "I was his friend. You may not like how he died, but you ought to remember that much." Edna stared him down. "I remember enough. And I'll remember you came by uninvited." Silas studied her a moment longer, then tipped his hat and left, reins jerking harder than needed. The wind carried his scent long after, the kind that turned milk sour. That evening, she stood again where the golden-veined rock had waited. She turned it over in her hands, thoughtful. It was heavy, but not heavier than grief, not heavier than secrets. She buried it again for now. The shadows stretched longer as she walked back to the house. A hawk cried from the orchard trees, its cry echoing over the field, sharp and solitary. Wes Calder's boot prints still lingered near the fixed fence. Edna knelt beside them without meaning to, pressing her palm where his had touched wood. She did not believe in omens, but she did believe in quiet things. She rose, dusted her hands, and went inside. The fire was already lit, the room warm, but she left one lantern in the window, unlit, just in case something, or someone, needed finding in the dark. And somewhere beyond the ridge, the storm began to stir. The gold in Edna's hand hadn't spoken, but the town already had. Dry Bend breathed gossip the way lungs breathed air, eagerly, hungrily, and with little care for accuracy. By the time she returned the next week, with nothing more than eggs and butter to trade, eyes met hers with a strange new light. Not pity this time, not even polite distance. Curiosity. It moved like a snake through the boardwalk, flicking tongues behind lace fans and under wide-brimmed hats. The whispers floated in and out of Edna's hearing as she walked toward the mercantile. Her spine stayed straight, her boots quiet on the wood. She found something out there. One man murmured near the barber shop, half-shaven face still frothy with cream. Her Eli always said that land was dry as bone. Funny how that changed after he died. Maybe it didn't change, came a woman's voice, low and sly. Maybe she did. The bell above the mercantile door rang as she stepped inside. Mr. Cutler, the shopkeep, looked up and hesitated before offering a nod. His daughter, June, didn't smile, didn't even greet her the way she used to when Eli was alive. Edna placed her eggs and butter gently on the counter. "I need flour and lamp oil," she said. June didn't move, just looked at her father. Cutler cleared his throat. "Prices have changed a touch, I'm afraid." Edna blinked. "Why?" "Transport's harder now. Weather. And increased demand." She saw it then. The shift. Not just suspicion, but positioning. They thought she had something they wanted, feared, resented, that made her dangerous in a way they couldn't name. "I'll take half then," she said calmly, placing the basket down. She left without looking back, the flour heavier than it should have been in her hands. Outside, the breeze had picked up, sharp with dust. She caught sight of a familiar silhouette near the blacksmith's forge, broad-shouldered, coat fraying at the sleeves. Wes Calder. He was hammering something with calm, practiced rhythm, but paused when he saw her. Their eyes met across the road. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just stood still, like he knew she needed silence more than kindness just now. Behind her, bootsteps scuffed. Edna May. She turned. Silas Finch, all silver and smug, had stepped from his law office like a fox out of a den. "I see you're still buying instead of selling," he said with mock pleasantness. "My land's not up for sale." "I recall saying that to Eli once," Silas said, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "He didn't listen either. That land's got value, Edna. You've got no men left, no protections, no heirs. You hold too many cards for a woman in your position." She studied him, heart steady, but her jaw set tight. "My position is just fine." "Is it?" he said softly, stepping closer. "This town will change its tune fast. One day you're the grieving widow. Next, you're the greedy witch who never shared her husband's gold." The word sliced, but Edna didn't flinch. "Let them talk. I'm still the one tending that soil with my bare hands." Silas leaned in slightly, voice colder. "You want friends, Edna, when people come looking." She stepped back. "I've survived without friends." He smiled, small and cruel. "Not without consequences." She turned her back on him, walked toward her wagon. As she passed the blacksmith's again, Wes was no longer hammering. He was standing, eyes narrowed on Silas's retreating form. Later that day, she stopped at the outskirts of town to visit the one person she trusted more than her own instincts. Hattie June lived in a house that smelled of herbs and thyme. Dried lavender hung from the beams, and clay jars lined every shelf like sentinels of quiet knowledge. "You're late for tea," Hattie said, not unkindly, ushering Edna inside. "I wasn't planning to come. Then I changed my mind." That usually means trouble. Edna Saturday, they're circling. Wolves always do when they sense blood or silver. I think it's both now. Hattie poured tea, strong and earthy, and slid a jar across the table. "This'll help with the sleep you're not getting." Edna's hand paused on the ceramic. "Did Eli ever say anything strange?" "In the last days." Hattie's eyes darkened. "Your husband was a good man, but he trusted wrong once or twice, especially when it came to Silas. He went out the day he died to talk with him, didn't he?" "Some say that. Some say he went looking for something." "I think I found it," Edna said quietly, "buried near the south ditch." Hattie didn't blink, just reached into her apron and pulled a folded, yellowing page. She slid it over. "What's this?" "Something he left with me. Said not to open unless you ask questions." Edna opened it. Just a few words in Eli's careful, slanted handwriting. "If I don't come back, tell her to look in the field where the birds never land." Edna's chest tightened. She hadn't seen a bird near that ditch in weeks. On her way home, the sun dipped into the hills, and the horizon turned orange with smoke and dust. She rode with her head high, but her soul stormed. Eli hadn't fallen. He'd been swallowed. As she crossed her property line, she saw him again, Wes, standing near the barn, examining the door. "Gate's loose again," he called. "I figured you might want it fixed before the next wind." She dismounted, boots crunching in frostbitten grass. "I didn't ask you to," she said. "I didn't wait to be asked." Something about the way he said it, the way he didn't reach for her pain, didn't prod it, just stood there, made her breath catch. She looked at his hands. One still held a hammer, the other a coil of wire. "There's talk in town," she said finally. "There always is. They say you defended me." He shrugged. "Didn't like the way they said your name." Her eyes softened. "Not with romance. Not yet, but with the ache of recognition. They'll come harder, you know." "I do." She stepped closer, close enough to smell smoke on his coat. "You've been on both sides of a fight, haven't you?" He didn't answer, just looked at her with the eyes of a man who knew loss like an old tune. Later, alone again, she walked the edge of her far field in moonlight. There, where the grass grew thinner and no bird sang, she saw it, just beneath the cypress stump a glint. She dug slowly, fingers raw, until metal met her palm. Not gold this time. A knife. Its blade dulled, but blood had once dried along its edge, and the hilt had initials carved in it, faint but clear. SF. Edna stood, lantern light trembling in her hand. The wind moved through the trees like a warning, and still not a single bird cried. She wrapped the knife in burlap and turned back toward the house, her breath fogging in the night air. Her feet felt heavy, but her resolve lighter. Someone had killed her husband, and she was not done planting justice in this land. The morning broke in smoke-gray hues, sky low and brooding, the kind of morning that carried the weight of old secrets and unfinished conversations. Edna sat at the kitchen table, Eli's worn ledger open before her. It wasn't the figure she was after. It was the spaces between them, the unsaid things tucked in margins, the jagged crossings out, and the dates that no longer matched memory. Near the back, tucked between entries on seed costs and fence repair, she found something different, a folded, yellowed page that had stiffened with time. She unfolded it with care. It wasn't addressed, only scrawled with ink that looked rushed. The handwriting, though, was unmistakably Eli's. Silas is pressing harder. Claims he knows. Says he'll ruin us unless I sign. Meeting him tomorrow at Bluff. If I don't. The sentence trailed off into a spidery smear, as if the ink had been dragged by trembling hands, or wet weather. Edna sat motionless for a moment, letting the silence speak louder than her thoughts. She touched the page, her thumb pressing lightly against that unfinished line. No signature, no goodbye, just a man with worry heavy enough to weigh down his pen. She didn't remember him writing letters often. When he did, he never left them behind. She slipped the page into her apron and left the house without breakfast. The barn creaked as she passed it, the cold pulling sound from wood like breath from a tired chest. Deputy Reed Dalton was sipping coffee on the porch of his modest house when she arrived. He straightened at the sight of her. Mrs. Hollister, everything all right? She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly, jaw tightening with each word. You think this was written the day he died? He asked. I think it was the reason. Dalton sighed and stepped inside, returning with a tin box labeled evidence. He didn't open it, just set it down between them on the porch rail. You're not the first to come to me with suspicion about Silas Finch, he said. But suspicion don't hang a man. We need proof, and we need it clean. I found a knife on my land, Edna said. SF carved in the handle. Dalton blinked. You turn it in. Not yet. You planning to? When I know it matters. He looked at her then, not just as a widow, not as a farmer, but as a force. A woman sharpened. You know going after Silas ain't just about law. It's about what happens after. I know. Then be careful. People like Silas don't fight fair. He owns too much, and he knows it. She nodded once and left, boots crunching against gravel. The knife was still hidden in the root cellar, wrapped in oilcloth, resting beside a shovel that had buried more than vegetables. When she returned home, Wes was already there, repairing the hinges on the henhouse. His coat was wet at the shoulders, hair curling at the edges with damp. He looked up when she approached, but said nothing until she did. I need to ask you something, she said. He stood straight, wiping rust from his palms with a rag. Go ahead. Did you know Eli? Wes hesitated. His jaw worked before the answer came. Briefly. We crossed paths. I was new in town back then. Did some hauling work near the mines. He never mentioned you. Wasn't worth mentioning. I was nobody. Still am most days. She stepped closer, voice steady. He wrote that Silas was pressing him. Said he'd ruin us if Eli didn't sign over the land. Said he was meeting him at the bluff the day he died. Wes didn't blink, but he didn't deny it either. I heard something like that, he said after a long pause. Men talked. Said Eli was stubborn. Said Silas didn't like being told no. Were you there? The question hung between them like fog. Wes looked down, ran a hand over his beard. I was nearby. I saw them arguing. I didn't stay long. Why not? Because I was afraid of what I'd see if I did. The truth in his voice was quiet but unflinching, and Edna, who had lived beside lies for too long, knew it was real. Why come back now? She asked. I didn't come back for you. I came back because I'm tired of running from ghosts. Yours just happened to have my name in its breath. She nodded slowly, as if something heavy inside her shifted just slightly. Then help me. With what? Truth. Whatever's coming. I can't face it alone. Wes exhaled long and low. I don't reckon you've ever been alone. Not really. Even silence stands beside you. That night, the wind rose fierce and sudden. Edna barely heard the first crash. It wasn't until the second, shattering glass, that she rushed out onto the porch. The barn glowed at its base. Someone had lit a lantern and hurled it into the straw. The fire licked upward fast, too fast. She grabbed the pump handle, working it frantically as buckets clattered around her boots. Then boots hit the earth, not hers. Wes, shirt half-buttoned, sprinted into the firelight, dragging barrels toward the blaze. Together they worked in desperate rhythm, smoke searing their lungs, sweat mixing with ash. When the flames hissed out, only the barn's right side had collapsed. In the settling quiet, Edna caught movement, someone running through the trees. Wes took off after them. She stood alone, one hand over her ribs, breath shaking. A moment later, Wes returned, dragging a limp, cursing man by the collar. "Recognize him?" he asked. Edna squinted. The man's face was red with smoke, but familiar. "Silas's stable boy," she whispered. Wes looked to the hills. "He's not acting alone." Deputy Dalton arrived within the hour, took the boy into custody, promised an investigation, but Edna knew better than to believe in justice, without pressure. As the stars returned to the sky, she sat beside Wes on the steps of the half-burned barn. Neither spoke for a long while, just watched embers glow and fade like fireflies caught in sorrow. "You could go," she said finally. "I could. But you won't." "No," he said. "Not until I fix what I ran from." She looked at him then, not as the stranger who hammered gates, but as a man who carried the same ache she did, shaped different only by silence. "You want coffee?" she asked. He nodded, slow. "That'd be real fine." In the kitchen, as she boiled water and poured from the tin, her hands no longer shook. She placed a mug in front of him, and for the first time, he reached, not just for the coffee, but for her hand. Briefly, wordlessly, and in that touch, there was something not yet love, but the first shape of its ghost. Out in the barn, soot lingered, but inside the house, the air had begun to change. Outside, the wind had settled, but Edna knew now, the storm hadn't passed. It had simply moved closer. Edna stood in the doorway of her half-burned barn as morning broke, light bleeding through gaps in the scorched boards. The fire hadn't taken everything, but it had come close, close enough to test her resolve, to curl her edges with smoke and memory. The scent of ash still clung to her apron, and in her chest, something old had begun to wake. Not anger, not yet, just a long, slow knowing. She had stared at the knife in her root cellar a dozen times since the fire. Now it felt heavier in her hands than gold ever could. The initials carved into its wooden hilt were no longer just letters. They were the beginning of a map, and she meant to follow it. Wes watched her from the pasture. He hadn't asked questions that morning, hadn't tried to fix what was broken. He simply fed the animals, tended to what remained. That was a kind of grace Edna had forgotten existed. A man who didn't demand the right to rescue her. Later that afternoon, Hattie June came walking up the dirt path, her skirts gathering dust and her face drawn tight with something deeper than weariness. "I brought something," she said before even reaching the porch. Edna led her inside, the fire already lit, kettle warming. Hattie sat slowly, as if the truth she carried had weight. "Back when Eli died," she said, "he left something with me. Said not to give it to you unless you asked the right question." "I asked," Edna said softly. Hattie reached into her satchel and pulled out a saddlebag, Eli's, unmistakably warm, the leather soft with use and sun. She set it down with reverence. Edna opened it slowly, breath tight in her ribs. Inside, folded with neat precision, was a map, her land drawn in Eli's careful hand. But it was not the fields or orchard that caught her eye. It was a mark scrawled near the southern bluff, a small red X. Beside the map was a sheet of paper, unsigned but unmistakably his. "If they come for you, if Silas wins, let this prove what I couldn't say. The bluff wasn't a fall. I told him no. That's all it took." Edna swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear. From fury restrained too long. Hattie said nothing. She didn't need to. By evening, Edna rode out with Wes toward the bluff, map in her coat, the knife tucked in her saddlebag. The wind was bitter, teeth against the skin, and the sky above churned with storm brewing weight. They reached the bluff just as the sun dipped behind the pines. The river below was thin and silver in the dying light. The trail that ran along the cliff's edge looked different now, less like a road and more like a trap. "This where he fell?" Wes asked, dismounting beside her. Edna nodded. "So they said." He walked the edge carefully, crouched low, scanning the ground. "Look here," he said, pointing. She knelt beside him. The dirt had shifted oddly, not eroded by rain or wind, but pressed, smeared in a pattern she wouldn't have noticed before, like something heavy had been dragged, and then the soil brushed over in haste. Wes stood slowly. His eyes were darker now, shadows flickering behind them. "I was nearby that night," he said. "Silas told me he just wanted to talk Eli into selling. Said if Eli wouldn't listen, we'd make it hard for him. I was stupid. I didn't know what he really meant." Edna didn't speak. Let him carry his own confession. I followed at a distance. Saw them arguing near this spot. Heard Eli shouting, "I won't sell to a man who buries lies with handshakes." Wes's jaw worked as he looked away. Then Eli turned to leave. Silas grabbed him. There was a struggle. I thought maybe it was just a scuffle. But Eli stumbled. He slipped. And Silas just stood there. Watched him fall. Didn't shout. Didn't move. He turned back to her. "I didn't help him. I ran." "You came back," Edna said, her voice quiet but clear. "I came back too late." She stepped to the edge, looking down where Eli's body had once landed. The wind stirred her coat, tugged at her hair. "I don't need revenge," she said at last, "but I'll have truth." Back in town, Deputy Dalton leaned over the papers Edna laid before him. Eli's map, the letter, and the knife. "It's a start," he said, slow and uncertain. "But Silas owns half the land records in this town. He'll argue forgery, theft, false memory. You put these in front of a judge, they'll bury it in legal dust." "I don't want a judge," Edna said. "I want a confession." Dalton leaned back. "You plan to corner him?" "No," Wes said from the doorway. "We plan to give him a choice." Later, as the moon rose over the fields, Edna stood on her porch again. The lantern by the door flickered low, and smoke curled up from the chimney like prayer. She held the knife in her lap, turning it slowly, tracing the carved initials with her thumb. Inside, Wes lit the fire and brought her a cup of coffee. He didn't speak, just sat near, not touching, not crowding. "I used to think Eli died because he was stubborn," she said after a long silence. "Now I know he died because he was honest." Wes met her eyes. "That's a hard kind of death." She looked down. "I don't know what to do with the rage." "Plant with it," he said. "Make it grow something." She reached for his hand this time, and this time he let her take it. It was a quiet touch, not born of need or romance, but recognition. Two people weathered by grief and grit, finally turning toward the same wind. Outside, the trees swayed, branches rustling like old voices. And somewhere in that night, Edna felt it, the storm shifting, not toward her, but behind, and a whisper in her ear, soft as a memory. "It's time." The morning of the spring festival arrived with a hush over Dry Bend, as if even the birds were holding their breath. Edna stood at her mirror in the small front room, brushing the last of the wood smoke from her coat and pulling her hair back in a loose braid. Her dress was simple, brown calico, stitched at the waist, but clean. She had mended it herself the night before, each needle prick steady and silent like a prayer. From the porch, Wes waited with the wagon reins in hand, eyes down, his hat held respectfully. He didn't wear his usual work coat. He'd pressed his sleeves and cleaned the scuffs from his boots. It wasn't a suit, but it was enough to show the town he hadn't just wandered in by accident. "You don't have to do this," Edna said as she stepped outside, voice soft. He looked up at her, eyes clear. "I know. I want to." They rode in silence, the wheels groaning softly beneath them as the hills rolled past in gold and green. Edna watched the fields blur by, old fences and distant birds, and wondered if Eli would have recognized her now. Not just for the clothes, or the man beside her, but for the quiet fire that no longer hid behind her eyes. The town square was dressed in ribbons and dust. Music trickled from the saloon, sweet and clumsy, and the smell of fried biscuits drifted over the crowd. Children darted between adults. Women in pastel shawls clutched their parasols like shields, and the men glanced sideways as Edna and Wes stepped down from the wagon. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. The stares said everything. Some with surprise, some with pity, and a few with a hunger Edna had grown used to, a hunger for weakness. Silas Finch stood near the courthouse steps, slick as ever, flanked by two of his hired men. He wore a vest with gold buttons and a pocket watch chain that glinted too loudly in the sun. His smile grew the moment he saw her. "Edna May Hollister," he said, voice like syrup poured over iron nails. "Didn't expect you'd be celebrating. Thought maybe you'd be out at that old farm, planting more ghosts." Edna kept walking. He stepped into her path. A word. Wes moved with her, but Edna's hand touched his lightly. "Let me." She turned. "Speak, Silas. But know this. I've buried a man, a barn, and 100 lies. I won't bury another." Silas's smile faltered just slightly. Strong words, but not proof. "I have your knife," she said, low enough for only him to hear. "I have Eli's letter. I have the map he drew the day before you killed him. And I have your boy, the one you sent to burn my barn. He's talking." His jaw twitched. "I bring this to Dalton and the judge. You'll spend your final days in a box no bigger than your conscience. You have no idea what you're playing with." "I'm not playing anymore." His eyes narrowed. "You think you've won? This town doesn't care about right and wrong. It cares about power." "I know," Edna said. "That's why I brought the one thing it does care about." She turned to the gathered crowd, which had quieted in that strange, animal way people do when they smell trouble. Edna stepped up onto the edge of the courthouse steps, lifted the cloth-wrapped bundle from her satchel, and unrolled it in front of them all. The rock gleamed dully in the light, rough, ugly, but unmistakable. Veins of gold ran through it like lightning trapped in stone. Gasps, murmurs. Then silence. "This land holds gold," Edna said, loud enough now. "I found it, same as Eli suspected before he died. Silas Finch tried to take that land from me. When Eli wouldn't sell, Silas killed him." "You have no proof," Silas snapped. "I have your knife. I say you forged that. I say you admit it. Right here, right now. Or I'll hand everything to Dalton. Every word. Every record." Silas lunged, quick as a viper. But Wes was quicker. He stepped between them, caught Silas by the collar, and slammed him against the post, so hard the air left the man's lungs in a bark. "You don't touch her," Wes growled. Deputy Dalton appeared then, gun drawn, face carved from stone. "Let him go," he said. "He's coming with me." Wes stepped back. Silas crumpled to his knees, coughing. Dalton hauled him up and locked irons around his wrists. As he was dragged away, Silas hissed, "You'll regret this, Edna. You think gold will save you? It only makes enemies." Edna looked at him one last time. Not with hate, not even with triumph. With pity. "I don't want gold," she said. "I want peace." Dalton nodded once. "We'll see what justice wants." The square erupted then, not in applause, but in the strange half-relieved murmur of people realizing someone had to stand up, and grateful it wasn't them. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and the sun leaned low over the hills, Edna and Wes walked back to the wagon. She carried the gold-veined rock in one hand, but her grip on it had loosened. "You really going to give that away?" he asked, nodding toward the stone. "Already have," she said, "to the schoolhouse fund. Let someone else chase it. I've had enough digging for one life." He smiled, a rare thing that stretched slow across his face like dawn-warming frost. They rode home in easy silence, the kind shared by people who no longer feared being known. As they passed the orchard, Wes pulled the wagon to a gentle stop. "Mind if I stay a while?" Edna stepped down, boots crunching soft earth. "You do more than stay. You plant with me." He reached into the back of the wagon and lifted out a peach sapling, roots still damp and wrapped in burlap. She blinked, surprised. "I saw it in town," he said. "Thought it looked like something that should belong here." She took it, hands brushing his. Their eyes met, not with heat, but warmth, the kind that melts long-held ice. They planted the sapling at the edge of the orchard, near the place where Eli's grave rested in soft shade. Not out of guilt, not out of grief, out of continuation. When it was done, they stood back together, hands dirty, hearts steadier than they'd been in years. Edna looked to the horizon, where the last gold of day flickered on the hills, not in veins, not in stone, but in light. "You know," she said quietly, "people think gold's something you dig for, but it's not. It's what stays when everything else is gone." Wes nodded. "And what's left is worth more." They turned back to the house, where smoke curled from the chimney, and a quiet supper waited. Behind them, the sapling trembled in the wind, not afraid, but ready. And deep beneath the soil, roots reached out in silence, anchoring to something finally strong enough to hold. Sometimes the worth of a thing isn't measured in what it can buy, but in what it can't replace.